Everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is...
Lieutenant, what is the interesting name of? Tsunami. Lieutenant Tsunami. That's who I am. Corey Lieutenant Tsunami Knockreiner. Wow, that took a long time to get to this time, Mark.
Tsunami is an actual threat actor.
Probably
name.
Japan. Maybe
something. I don't know. I don't remember where it is. We'll have to look that up.
I feel like they're picking a type of storm that's or weather event that's common in whatever state they're talking about, and I always relate tsunamis to Japan. In fact, tsunami is a Japanese word for the storm too, right? Yeah, tsunami, Japanese origin.
Tsunami for private sector threat actors is just the name. So private sector. Corey is a private sector lieutenant.
Makes sense. No, I said commander, dude. Oh, no, I said lieutenant. You're right. I was thinking commander, but then lieutenant was closer to cadet, which might transition to what we're going to share today on today's podcast.
Today's episode, we are discussing a brand new named threat actor named Cadet Blizzard. Before that, though, we'll discuss...
I guess we'll find out.
Money laundering with Bitcoin, an update on the MOVEit Transfer exploits that have been running rampant around the world.
Julian, Julian. Leave MOVEit alone.
Exactly. And then also discuss a binding directive from our friends at CISA. With that super long intro, let's go ahead and dance our way in.
Do you think anyone will know the King Julian reference? You said dance your way in, so I had to do it.
My mistake.
Leave it in, by the way. Note to producers. I want the my mistake.
So we're going to start this week with a update on something we chatted about last week. If you remember last week, we discussed Corey's favorite file transfer application that I'm probably going to regret bringing up again on this episode. But anyways.
I'll be nice. I won't sing King Julian's favorite song. But okay, if you know what it is, silently think it in your head right now.
So last week we discussed the file transfer application.
That's the name of the product. MOVEit.
Yep. Yeah. App by Progress. Pretty popular, as we're discovering, very popular with a lot of enterprise-sized organizations around the world.
Strange. I'd never heard of it, by the way, so I'm surprised how many folks use it.
Well, after last week, there's been a few more updates. First off, so I guess Progress brought in Huntress to do source code analysis as part of their response to the vulnerabilities and the active exploits. And Huntress actually found another SQL injection flaw, CVE 2023-34362, which has since been patched as of a couple of days ago. So after our last episode aired, before this one's going to air. With this one, it was discovered internally being with Huntress, and there hasn't been any reports of it being exploited in the wild. It's more of a, due diligence and make sure that you covered all your gaps kind of thing. So good on Progress for that one. That said, there have been more victim notifications since our last episode, mainly because Klopp's June 14th extortion deadline has since passed. So for the first wave of victims, they set a deadline of June 14th to pay the extortion demands, threatening to release information about stolen data on that date, at which they have. So now we know some additional victims include Transportation for London, so the organization that runs all of the underground tubes within central London. The energy behemoth Shell was hit by it as well, too. And the University Systems of Georgia were another kind of big name victim of this. Most of them have confirmed, at least publicly, some exposure to the breach. Now, there were actually reports from Kroll. They released an analysis last week as well, too, right after we recorded our episode, where they examined IOC activity around this vulnerability, which they believe proves that Klopp have been experimenting with it as far back as 2021. So specifically, they had an IP address associated with Klopp that was probing MOVEit transfer servers as early as July of 2021. But they only started gathering organization IDs by exploiting the vulnerability in preparation for this big attack in mid-May of this year. So, I mean, it looks like they at least suspected the vulnerability existed a couple of years ago, but it was just last month that they really started attacking it and preparing in earnest for the early June wide exploitation across a lot of victims. Kind of shows, though, that some of these vulnerabilities can stick around for a very long time before they're actually discovered and resolved by software manufacturers. If you are a MOVEit Transfer customer, I think it's, I don't know, Corey, do you agree? Definitely too late at this point if you haven't already updated your servers.
Probably. And we never did that Shodan search we talked about to see if there's probably a Shodan search that could actually maybe find whatever they put on the server using the flaw, if I remember right. But we never did it. But yes, it's been around for a while. It's got a ton of deals, so might be too late. As a little shout out, by the way, in our internet security report, our endpoint author talks a lot about ransomware groups, and Klopp is one of them. And he mentions, I think the name for this MOVEit thing, it's called Go Anywhere vulnerability. They give it like a name, Go Anywhere with MOVEit, I guess. But Hitachi, Virgin Group, Ferrari. So Klopp has been popping a lot of folks.
Yeah, that report will be, I think, next week as of the time this episode airs. We'll probably chat about it on the next episode after this. So that was just a quick update. Moving on to the first thing I wanted to hit. So I read an article last week where discussing some new methods that cyber criminals are using to kind of mask their Bitcoin activity on the blockchain. And I know, as much as I've tried to remove myself from the cryptocurrency ecosystem, some of this stuff is still pretty interesting, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure.
So I guess bit of background on this. We should probably describe kind of how Bitcoin transactions work. I think we've talked about it probably a few years ago now on the podcast of why Bitcoin is both anonymous while also being entirely public. So I guess first and foremost, like wallets on the Bitcoin and most cryptocurrency exchanges, they are anonymous. Like you or I could go set up a new cryptocurrency wallet, and until we do something that gives us up, like no one would be able to map that wallet back to us. That said, transactions on at least the Bitcoin blockchain itself are not anonymous. They are entirely public. You can follow a transaction from start to finish, including how much was sent. It's literally a public ledger. Now, there's some cryptocurrencies like Monero that are designed to also mask some of that activity, but Bitcoin itself is a fully public ledger that anyone can view. So as an example of like how some threat actors can end up being caught through blockchain analysis, as Corey's dog freaks out at the mailman.
I think it's somebody trying to launder blockchain in my front yard. That's probably the dog's warning me.
Yep. Let's give an example of like how a transaction looks on the blockchain, and then we can point out like how law enforcement typically catches with some of these components. So as an example, let's say like I want to go buy a bazooka on the dark web. And it's going to cost me 5 Bitcoin, which...
By bazooka, you mean that really hard and kind of stale gum that people like Pop Corey eat?
Man, I have not thought about bazooka.
By the way, that would be just as hard to get nowadays as a bazooka, so you probably would have to go on the dark web and pay too much for it.
5 Bitcoin, that's what, like $100,000 right now? That's probably a fair price for a bazooka or some bazooka gum. So example though, I want to go buy a bazooka for 5 Bitcoin off of the dark web. So first thing first, I'm going to go set up a new Bitcoin wallet. Setting up a wallet is basically just creating a public and private key. That's it. I then need to get some Bitcoin to send it to that dark web marketplace. So let's say I go to Coinbase and I buy 10 Bitcoin. I want to make sure that I'm being efficient with my transactions. Maybe I want something in the future too. So I'll buy a little bit more than I actually need. In order to get that 10 Bitcoin into my wallet, I withdraw it from Coinbase, which transfers it into my wallet. That transfer transaction ends up as with an output, and we'll get into what we mean by that in a second. that basically says the output of this transaction is 10 Bitcoin going to this wallet address. Remember, wallet addresses is just basically the public key with your key pair. In order to create transactions, you sign them with the private key. That's how you validate you own that public key. But at a high level,
everyone,
me withdrawing 10 coins from Coinbase ends up with a transaction on the blockchain saying the output of this transaction, 10 Bitcoin associated with Mark's wallet. So now I need to send 5 Bitcoin to that dark web marketplace to pay for my bazooka. I'm going to create a new transaction, sign it with my wallet's private key to prove it's me. And in that transaction, I point to the output of that first one associated with my wallet as the input to this transaction. Think of a transaction as literally a series of inputs mapped to a series of outputs. So the input for this new one is the output from that last one, 10 Bitcoin coming in, then 5 Bitcoin going out to the dark web marketplace. And then there's a remainder, they call it change or whatever, that points right back to my wallet. So there's another output of 5 Bitcoin in my wallet. So when you look at like the balance of a wallet on the blockchain, really you're looking at all of the transactions that have a output with that wallet's address and the total amount of Bitcoin within that output. Man, this is getting more complicated than I thought it would.
But makes sense.
So
I'm
now
following,
there's two.
So that means almost anyone can.
Yep, there's 2 transactions now that we're discussing. So there's that first withdrawal from Coinbase, where the output of 10 Bitcoins associated with my wallet, and then there's the second transaction where I map that output to a new input of 10 Bitcoin, an output of 5 going to the dark web marketplace, and an output of 5 going right back into my wallet as the leftover change. Now let's say that marketplace, they want to go cash out. So they transfer that, set up a new transaction with that 5 Bitcoin I sent them as an input, output going to crypto.com as an exchange, and then no remaining output on that transaction back to their wallet because it's just 5. So long story short, now we can see I purchased 10 Bitcoin from Coinbase. We can see it going to my wallet. We can see 5 of it going to this dark web marketplace one, and then that 5 ending up at crypto.com. All of this is entirely public. And so as a law enforcement agency, if I'm able to subpoena crypto.com, I can see that it was Mark's user account that purchased that 10 Bitcoin originally. If I subpoena crypto.com, I can see the owner of that dark web marketplace wallet. You can see how this could be a problem if you're actually trying to buy illegal things on the dark web marketplaces, or if you're trying to make off with your crypto or your ransomware extortion demands, and why threat actors might go to some lengths to try and mask their identity. Most cyber criminals, they get burned somewhere along the line of trying to cash out their wallets. We've discussed it a lot on this podcast before. The FBI seems to be becoming very good at tracing these transactions, even through some different masking opportunities. And then they can subpoena the cryptocurrency exchange to gain information on who that individual was that tried to withdraw their money. Now, one of the ways they try and mask their identity, maybe they use stolen IDs to open accounts. When you try and open an account on Coinbase.com right now, you have to upload a picture of your driver's license or passport or whatever. Sometimes, I think we've talked about this before, threat actors using social engineering to trick people into sharing their ID picture, and then they'll use that picture to open an account on one of these websites. That's one way. Another way they try and mask their transactions is using something called a mixer. So, Corey, can you guess what a mixer might be in the context of blockchains?
Mixing multiple transactions together in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's something they have in the background so that they can do things while they're figuring out how to launder money.
Actually, that's probably more accurate. Yeah. So you can think of a mixer. It's basically just a pool of wallets used to shuffle around and send transactions to each other over and over and over. Now, participants in the mixer, they would deposit money from one wallet they own, the money they want to try and launder. And then ultimately, the mixer website, protocol, app, whatever, would know to send that same amount to another wallet that the attacker, the criminal, whatever, controls. So as an example, let's say there's 1,000 people participating in this mixer. 1,000 people deposit 1 Bitcoin in, and then 1,000 different wallets get 1 Bitcoin out. And because of this, there's no way of knowing, like, my malicious wallet sending in a Bitcoin goes to some other person's wallet ultimately at the end. It kind of breaks that transaction flow. Like, yes, the FBI will know that it's associated with this original activity, but it's not me that actually owns that specific Bitcoin or amount at the end.
By the way, two things I just wanted to mention here. One, this is all just kind of obfuscation. There's still a path to find. It's just like proxies that you'd have to go back through multiple hops to find it. But two, it's just so, another thing we've talked about on cryptocurrency is just the fact that you got to trust people that you don't, like exchanges. There's been so many hacks of exchanges where you put a trust in exchange to help hold some of your cryptocurrency so that you could switch it between currencies quickly. In the end, they either quote unquote get hacked or maybe someone internally pretended to get hacked so they could steal all your money. So what I'm getting at is I presume there is a risk of, like, you're trusting all those other 1,000 people and the people that are administrating the mixer when you're doing this laundering. So it feels like that I wouldn't be surprised one day if some mixer network is accused of deciding to suddenly steal a bunch of the Bitcoin instead of providing laundering services.
Yeah,
just an anecdotal comment. But yeah, I get it. Definitely a mixer group of people that decide to come together to let them transact coin between each other. And hopefully they're doing it equally with what they bring in order just to mask all kinds of weird transactions so the bad one doesn't show up in your wallet anymore. You have new good ones. It's the casino. Exactly. It's the casino of cryptocurrency.
There you go. Now, that said, mixers aren't immune to being analyzed by, like, the FBI. As an example, typically it's not like everyone puts in 1 Bitcoin at the same time. Like, I might deposit 10 that I want to launder, someone else deposits 5, someone else deposits 15. And if you see then a wallet withdrawing 10, a wallet withdrawing 5, a wallet withdrawing 15, you can pretty much guess that that's associated with the original one. Now, you can get crafty and split them up and say, if I deposit 10, I send it 5 here and 5 there. But law enforcement's pretty good at piecing that together and potentially finding all of the associated withdrawal wallets.
Just takes more work.
Exactly. Just takes more work, but it's not impossible. As you might guess, mixers are in general illegal in the United States. The government has arrested a lot of people associated with creating these mixers and different protocols to support it. There was a pretty big example.
Have they arrested anyone, any U.S. citizen that was using it, or have they only gone after the folks that provide the service? Just curious, if you know.
I don't think specifically for using it, but they've arrested people that have used it as part of laundering money from, like, ransomware extortions, as an example. They've even gone after, like, authors of protocols designed to act like this. Like Tornado Cash is one we talked about, which was an open source blockchain technology that was literally hosted on GitHub, and the author of it ended up getting arrested for anti-money laundering charges. So they definitely take it seriously. So that's historically how cyber criminals have tried to launder money. They try and do it through mixers and pools like that. But we've seen the FBI specifically and other law enforcement agencies are getting good at still tracking transactions through there, which means cyber criminals are trying to find other mechanisms to try and mask their activity. So last week, the cryptocurrency analysis company Chainalysis published a post describing a new method of laundering cryptocurrency using cryptocurrency mining pools. So a mining pool, I'll try and get through this quick. When you mine Bitcoin, quote unquote, basically all you're doing is taking a bunch of transactions that have been advertised into the blockchain, putting them together in a package, and then effectively trying to create a random number until you create the quote unquote correct random number. That's the 10,000 foot description of this.
By the way, and what's important is, while that 10,000 foot description sounds, simple, and it kind of is, it's a lot of heavy math that, it's a simple description, but it's a lot of processing time for your computer. So you are giving away a lot of resource in order to do that.
Yeah, so exactly. So when you guess that right number, the transactions are added to the blockchain. The person that found that correct number is awarded a few coins as payment for it. And then everyone on the blockchain tries it again until with the next batch of transactions until the next right number is found, and repeat and repeat and repeat. The reality is there are so many people and so many computational resources participating in the blockchain that the chance of like me with my computer's graphics card doing all of this actually finding that correct number myself is statistically extremely unlikely. And so cryptocurrency
Now,
mining pools,
it actually was pretty common back in the first few years, but it gets worse and
yes,
worse as time goes on.
yeah, 20 years ago I could have gotten a lot of Bitcoin by doing this, but
Is it
now
that
it's
long?
extremely
Yeah, I guess it
unlikely.
was around 2009. Well, it's
So to
been a
make up
while.
for that, people can participate in mining pools where you use like specialized mining software that kind of aggregates every participant's mining capabilities together. This central mining pool administrator is responsible for divvying out the number guessing, for lack of a better word, again, high level. And if one person ends up getting the correct one and getting the transactions out of the blockchain, everyone that participates in the mining pool receives a share of the proceeds from that. So that's extremely popular and just legitimate use of cryptocurrency. But we're seeing threat actors now, or at least Chainalysis is seeing threat actors abusing some of these mining pools to try and like hide or camouflage some of their illicit proceeds they've received from ransomware. So they traced transactions through intermediary wallets, all the way from a ransomware extortion wallet up to the mainstream, as they call it, cryptocurrency exchange deposit address. So think like all the way from the ransomware wallet to Coinbase.com, where I'm going to try and withdraw my money. Typically, these deposit addresses, they're associated with a single user. It's like my account on Coinbase will have a deposit address just for me. Any money that gets deposited into that is associated with my Coinbase account. Now, as you might guess, a cyber criminal doesn't want their ransomware wallet directly associated with that withdrawal one, because that is how you get arrested by the FBI. So in reviewing transactions with these deposit addresses, Chainalysis found an equal amount of money actually came from known mining pools as well too. And so they're theorizing that these cyber criminals are using mining pools, sending a lot of their proceeds from quote unquote legitimate mining to these cryptocurrency exchange wallets, while also sending a little bit of ransomware money in there too, in hopes that the cryptocurrency exchange just sees a whole bunch of mining activity, goes, okay, that's someone that just does a lot of cryptocurrency mining, and they don't investigate too deep into the other activity in there. And that could potentially allow them to withdraw a bunch of money without getting caught. Chainalysis also found a few examples where the cyber criminals deposited directly the proceeds from ransomware into a mining pool, and then that mining pool forwarded the money onto a cryptocurrency exchange. So it looks like they may actually own some of these mining pools as well too. So I don't know. I thought this was pretty interesting in some of the new ways that they're trying to mask their activity, because like we've talked about and pointed out, like US law enforcement, and I think the Dutch as well too, are getting really good at tracing some of these transactions. And the reality is Bitcoin is still one of the easiest ways to pay for ransomware. And so they have to find new ways of masking their identity while withdrawing money.
And the takeaway I think here is that this is still traceable. It's just a new tech. It's a new obfuscation because everything is so public down to mining. Like you say, it's probably the pure volume that a mining, that when an exchange is looking to see if things are, there's all kinds of different wallets or whatever. If they see mining, they may not go the full depth of analysis there, but it's there for those who look. So now that Chainalysis has released this, even though it might be a way they've been hiding, I feel like the authorities now are, it's kind of this cat and mouse game of different techniques of how you can obfuscate to a final clean wallet malicious funds. And I'm sure they'll find new ways over and over again, but once one comes out, because of the nature of the public ledger,
And that was
But there's
basically
also why
Chain
ones
Alice's
like
takeaway.
Monero exist, right, too, because it's a little less public there.
Yep. And I mean, to be clear, Chainalysis, this is their product they offer,
Yeah,
is
this is what they
basically
do.
reputation for wallet addresses. And so their takeaway was cryptocurrency exchanges should use our product to identify the reputation of wallets that are depositing money,
Which is
fair.
good on
Yeah.
them. I mean, it's hard work, but it's not a technique that no one. I mean, anyone can do this technique if they invest the amount of time. I'm sure chain analysis to do this well and quickly has a lot of automation that they've taken a long time to create.
Yeah.
And that's what you're probably really buying.
But I do think the future of like cyber criminal activity involving cryptocurrency is going to continue moving away from Bitcoin and into protocols like Monero that add a little bit more privacy to transactions. That said, like the FBI is clearly investing a lot of money and resources into trying to break and gain visibility into these. And we've even seen regulatory action lately, specifically targeting cryptocurrency. It feels like we're getting closer to a culmination of like actually potentially having action banning or impacting cryptocurrency within the US. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
And maybe a federally set one that offers the more regulated and secure option to get the benefit of digital currency without all these problems. I will say it just makes me more cynical. I'm the one that there's a lot of I hate to say it, cryptocurrency bros out there that are, oh, this is fantastic and normal people can use it and you can do it for all kinds of legitimate stuff. And all those people that say it's mostly malicious, they're just full of crap. There, look at all this legit stuff we see. But then you see something like this where mining is purely legit, and yet the owners of the mining pools seem to have wallets that are full of ransomware. So it kind of questions the, oh, you say it's legit and you were saying, oh, like this mining pool that's a totally legit thing to do. No big deal. Nothing to see here. Casino's legit. We're just taking advantage of users that want to gamble. But the truth is they're actually a criminal organization laundering money. So it's just kind of all these libertarian, I love the utopian idea of not having governments and banks to control things, but it just creates a breeding ground for a wild west of criminals, in my opinion.
And this is why anti-money laundering laws exist, and why things like reporting suspicious transactions or transactions over $10,000 is a requirement for most financial institutions. So cryptocurrency is not immune from that. And yes, while you can't enforce it,
was immune for that for a
itself,
period, but not anymore.
Yeah. And while you can't enforce it on the blockchain itself, you can absolutely enforce it with organizations that participate in the blockchain, like exchanges and individuals that create mixers and things like that. So, yep. Anyways, moving on. It's been over a whole week since we last talked about our friends at CISA. So let's revisit an article from CISA. How's that sound?
I'm looking. It says sizzle.
You can do better than
sizzle?
that. No.
Sorry. I'm tired.
Yes.
It's a long week of graduation. It tires out the dad joke factory.
Congratulations on finally graduating.
Oh, yeah. It took me a while. But now I got my GD.
GD.
Okay. Oh, college or oops, that'd be a little longer.
Great. Anyways, last week CISA issued a binding operational directive to federal civilian executive branch agencies, requiring them to review.
Seriously,
it does, yeah. Review and mitigate.
CISA was in the BSDM binding. Oh, goodness gracious. Make it safe for our work, CISA.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. So, what does this binding directive require? It requires federal civilian executive branch agencies to...
Duct tape?
Oh my God, Corey.
Sorry.
Review and mitigate risk from internet-exposed management interfaces.
Huh. Where have we heard that you should protect management interfaces before? I wonder. Anyways, keep going.
So it notes that recently threat actors are using, quote, a certain class of network device to gain unrestricted access to organization networks.
Yeah, pretty much any network device that has an admin interface on the web
yep.
or can be put on the web.
points to inadequate security, misconfigurations, and out-of-date software that makes them vulnerable to exploitation, and that the risk is further compounded if the device management interfaces are connected directly to the internet. Pause here for a second for a no duh. But as we've seen, this is not an issue that some organizations take seriously. Apparently, not even some federal civilian branch agencies either. So the binding operational directive, it's different than like CISA advisories that are all about like, here's information we're seeing and how to protect yourself. This is a straight up rule coming from the, I guess, for lack of a better word, the regulatory arm of CISA for agencies under their jurisdiction saying, you have to do this, period.
They handcuff you down and make you do it.
So the directive, first off, it defines networked management interfaces as a dedicated device interface, not like a physical interface, but like a UI or a console that is accessible over network protocols and is meant to exclusively for users to perform administrative activities. The directive applies to devices that meet two criteria. First, it needs to be a router, switch, firewall, VPN concentrator, proxy, or load balancer. And second, the management interface must use HTTP, HTTPS.
By the way,
FTP.
can we pause? Yes. Like, I don't know why they're limiting it to, this should really be any device. Because, for instance, there's camera control network devices, not software, like a gateway for your DVR that have web administration and have sensitive information. There's all kinds of, I love that they're focusing on the network ones. They're definitely the ones that offer the most risk to the organization. And same for protocols, they're pointing out the most common protocols we see this type of action on. But why limit it to that? I mean, any device that has sensitive information and a web administrative interface, I don't care what it is, you should follow the same practices. And theoretically, there could be one that over a web application or that could use a different protocol too. So, while I appreciate them giving us some devices and common protocols that have this problem, I'm kind of curious why they locked it down to just those. I will get to one exception I understand, which I'll talk about after you finish where we were with the protocols. Sorry for the interruption.
SNMP, Telnet, TFTP, RDP, RSH, SSH, SMB, VNC, and X11.
By the way,
was a lot of acronyms.
Freaking puts SMB on the internet?
A lot of people that got nailed by
apparently.
Eternal Blue.
I know, nuts. Actually, it wasn't that more for internal lateral movement. Anyways.
I think that this directive, it's specifically in response to, we're not trying to throw stones in glass houses here, but specifically in response to the like Fortinet and SonicWall vulnerabilities that have been widely exploited in just the last couple of months.
Yeah.
So it seems like
but there's been many.
Activity.
VPN filter targeted a lot of devices. Our own Cyclops Blink targeted our management interface, which we've always we've given the advice you shouldn't put our management interface on the internet. It should be behind VPN with multi-factor. So this could be many things. Now I will get to the point is I get them talking about there was a section, I'm not sure you're going to talk about this, where they're talking about internet-based protocols. A lot of these devices also have serial connections, or maybe even USB or other IO port management connections. They do explicitly not apply to that, like a serial connection. Granted, it can actually be out of band. There could be a phone number attached to it, but they're not saying that you have to lock down the serial connections in the same way. So I get the distinction between like Ethernet, network-based internet connections. I just don't think they have to, they should have used these protocols as examples, but not limited to, because I definitely think there's a lot of other devices that have management interfaces that I also don't want to see our government friends put on the internet. When there's Correct. A loophole, it sounds like if I did put my internal jail cameras DVR device on the internet, I wouldn't get as much. I don't have the binding directive against that.
Yeah. So for this one, it is specifically routers, switches, firewalls, so on and so forth. It explicitly does not apply to web apps and interfaces for cloud service provider offerings. So just
Definition, you need that interface to be available to get to the
exactly.
cloud. Yeah.
Now, the directive itself, it has a required action specifically within 14 days of the directive
Oh,
or
pretty quick.
discovery of an in-scope system. They have to remove the interface from the internet by making it only accessible from the internal enterprise network, which CISA recommends an isolated management network specifically, and then enforce access control to the interface through a policy enforcement point separate from the interface itself. Basically, use other firewalling rules and network access
Yeah.
to the interface to only internal.
Sounds like things like VPN could help. Jump boxes that have limited access could help. I do like the fact that they even say, I want to pause on that isolated management network. This becomes more internal segmentation advice. But Mark and I have talked repeatedly about how a lot of people internally have that chewy middle network that's flat. But even when they do segment, I think it's good for management interfaces for these devices to have their whole different segment only accessible by, the IT people that can get to that network, for instance, or security folks. So not only is it cool to only make management internal, even internally, your whether they be a salesperson, a doctor, or whatever, shouldn't have access to the network that actually is the management network of all these interfaces too. So I like that it sounds like they don't require that because so few people segment. That is hard policy and setup work. I mean, not too hard, but you actually have to do some work to do it. But it's a fantastic recommendation to get that extra level of internal security that will save you when you do have isolated breaches.
And the 14 days turnaround is very quick for
that's
federal
quick.
government. And I guess it kind of comes from how serious this actual risk is for organizations. Like we're seeing network appliances being nailed left and right across the internet.
Like you say, it's pretty much a no-duh that you don't put an administrative management interface on the internet. So I can see them being a little more forceful and getting you off that crack quickly.
Yep. So CISA is actually going to help out agencies with this, though. So they said CISA actions are going to scan for devices and interfaces in scope of this directive. They're going to provide
is the
federal
help
agencies.
out a secret for we're going to enforce the heck out of this, and if we find them, you're in trouble?
But they are actually helping with resources.
It is true.
To mitigate
it is
them
true.
too.
I'm
So
just
they're
being
gonna-
purposely.
Basically help agencies find these. They said they'll engage agencies to review and provide technical expertise for hardening specific devices as requested. They'll work with CISOs within these agencies to escalate if necessary. And they will continue to review and update this directive over the next couple of years to reflect changes in the threat landscape. So they're going to give resources to help out, but it does seem like CISA is saying, hey, this is serious. You guys have to jump on this. You have 2 weeks. Go. It's kind of nuts. This does seem to be I think we've been following a transition or, I don't know, a evolution of CISA over the past few years of moving from that kind of information sharing organization to more of we're actually going to help formulate requirements and help provide resources to enact those requirements as well. Seems
From
like
my perspective, maybe it's
mature.
the government. Yeah, it's maturity, I think, for sure, because they were a new organization not too long ago. And they might just be getting sick of it, because I remember articles 10 years ago where a lot of government agencies, whether it be US CERT, NISTRA, just agencies related to the government, have been giving these good security recommendations for ages. And yet a lot of government organizations have been getting C's and D's on their assessment. So maybe CISA's finally, okay, we keep on saying it nicely and you're still not doing it. It's time to pull out the ban hammer.
Yep, exactly. And actually, I talked to one of the cybersecurity directors for CISA recently. I think he's for the Midwest region, and he actually had an interesting point that I hadn't thought of until then, and that he doesn't actually like that CISA is becoming the regulatory arm as well too. Because historically,
Why?
CISA has always been we will come help you out. Our job isn't to fine you, regulate you, because we want you to come to us and share information freely.
Yeah.
And if suddenly they're also the ones coming down saying, oh, you didn't follow this rule, so here's your slap on the back of the head, it might
People
incentivize
might, yeah.
organizations to not come to them.
But on the flip side, if you're being the nice guy version of it for so long and people still aren't doing it, you know what I mean? I think all of us like to be that carrot person. All of us would love regulation adds complexity, a pain in the need for more resource, and frankly, a waste of money. And if people could self-regulate, you always would want to avoid regulation. I think that's just common sense. But it also seems to be human nature that people sometimes don't do it anyway. So I get that. I get that if they start to become more enforcey, people might not want to tell them as much. But people certainly are still not, the government agencies are still not following the best practices when you've been the good guy trying to help them out. So I do see the point where someone eventually has to say, no, we can't wait for this anymore. It's a requirement. You're not doing the right thing. We're going to make you do the right thing or get out.
Yep. And I think their argument is absolutely that someone needs to exist, but it needs to be separate from the organization you're supposed to.
It would be
go
nice
to
if we're separate. I mean, it would be nice if, it'd be cool for CISA not to have to do this and the government to get off their butt and Congress to actually pass some laws and focus on this. But
wouldn't that be great?
They seem to be the one that are ignoring the problem too.
Correct.
Anyways, fighting about dumb crap. Sorry.
Yep. Correct. Moving on, before we hit to the last news story, Corey, pop quiz for you. Cadet Blizzard.
I don't
Where
remember
is that
Blizzard.
threat actor located?
Well, Blizzard is I do know that Blizzard is my key. Goodness gracious. Would it be, where's cold? I think Siberia? Is this Russia related?
Correct. So, last week, Microsoft published a blog post naming a brand new, distinct Russian state-sponsored threat actor, which they've called Cadet Blizzard. They were previously tracked as Dev 0586 after being initially discovered last year. If you remember Microsoft's naming convention,
give them that Blizzard is a lot more memorable. There's a better chance I will remember that name than Dev 0586.
Well, so the Dev naming convention, it's their old one. Now, if they were just recently discovered, it would be Storm some number as we think this is a separate threat actor group, but we don't have enough info yet. Once they've determined that it is an individual organization or group, that's when they give them a fancy name like Cadet Blizzard.
Yep.
So they first discussed Cadet Blizzard back in January of 2022 in the lead up to the Ukraine war. Where they were deploying locker malware that was designed to look like ransomware, but with no actual recovery mechanism, called Whispergate.
Is it locker or even wiper?
Wiper.
I mean, both. Locker, I guess they're technically. I like to mix it. There's an old type of locker malware that was consumer based, where it tried to be like ransomware, but instead of locking your files, it would lock your operating system, and all you had to do to get into it is boot into safe mode and delete some of its crappy registry entries and stuff. So that's what I think of locker. I feel like this is more like wiper, and by that we mean it's encrypting all your files, but there is no recovery. It's purely trying to be destructive, right?
Yep. So for Whispergate, as an example, it would wipe out your master boot record and then reboot your computer. And so without that master boot record, it couldn't find the right volumes to boot, and then it would effectively be locked out forever. In their most recent update, Microsoft says they believe Cadet Blizzard are associated with the Russian GRU military intelligence organization, but they are separate from the known GRU groups like who they call Forest Blizzard, which is also known as their old name Strontium, and Seashell Blizzard, which are our good friends Sandworm.
Yeah. Hello, guys. Sorry that we wiped your persistence.
Yes, exactly. Screw them. So Cadet Blizzard have also been linked to defacements of Ukraine's websites, and they're also associated with a hack and leak forum called Free Civilian that we'll talk about in a little bit. So they noted that they operate with a lower degree of operational security than those longstanding Russian groups we just mentioned. They sometimes work with the private sector. The way, the summary I basically got from this was, this seems to be like the script kiddie intro to Russian state-sponsored hacking.
Could I
Script kidding
mix that?
uses
Because
other tools,
I
but
think, yeah, I feel like they have the capability of sophistication, meaning like a script kiddie would literally download files all over the place and run scripts.
yep.
These folks do use living off the land attacks, but some purely espionage state sponsored actors, while they might use the same living off the land techniques, they go much further to be silent.
Yeah.
They wipe their logs. They do, and these folks are using sophisticated-ish techniques. I mean, not they're stuff techniques we know, but they're relatively sophisticated. They Rather than cleaning up their tracks, though, it's almost like they're trying to obviously show that, like, it's almost like a intimidation type of thing where they're probably as sophisticated as the other ones, but their mission is actually to kind of be, we're the brute force jokes, people that are trying to show you how bad a deal this could be if you're at war with us or something. That was my take on what I read.
That's fair. Some of the tools they've been using are very, they're quote unquote sophisticated.
They're
but
public,
definitely
yeah.
entry level tools like Meterpreter shells versus like a Cobalt Strike beacon.
But the point is, even Meterpreter, my understanding of even these guys is they use Meterpreter sparingly, and it's mostly actually just living off the land techniques. But they're trying not to hide themselves. Yeah.
So they, like you mentioned, they do commonly use living off the land techniques after initial access. When it comes to initial access, some of the examples Microsoft pointed out, there was a Confluence server bug from 2021, Exchange server proxy shell, and other common web application exploits to gain access into the network. For persistence, they're using web shells, primarily Pony Shell and regeorge. For privilege escalation,
which are known, so that could maybe count as a script kiddie thing.
They'll dump the LSASS process memory using proc dump. They frequently rename it, by the way, to dump64.exe. So that's one.
By the way, if they were renaming it, sign of sophistication, picking a name that's just slightly different. Come on, you could have done it. Isn't the original literally called proc dump64.exe? So they literally just removed the dump.
Yep. Remove the proc. Yeah, maybe they should rename
it to the proc
malware.exe, and that would have been better at hiding it.
Maybe that's where Trump keeps talking about of votes that apparently maybe that's where they're storing that dump of votes. Sorry,
I really don't want to hear any more about Trump's dumps. Moving on. So they also steal credentials and other information from the Windows registry using just straight up reg save commands. And they also commonly use PowerShell to retrieve and execute malware on compromised systems as well too. So like a lot of off-the-shelf tools, things that are available publicly on GitHub or underground forums, and a lot of just built-in commands to Microsoft Windows for this activity. When it comes to what they do with the information, so a lot of the stolen information has been leaked on the dark web website called Free Civilian, which Microsoft believes is basically owned by Cadet Blizzard as a way to throw shade at Ukraine, I guess. They ended this report with some mitigations. You can guess what the number one mitigation is. And that's multi-factor authentication.
If they're just using your credentials to move around with legitimate tools, maybe you need to find a way to protect the credentials and identity of your users.
Yep. They recommend reviewing authentication logs for all remote access infrastructure, and then blocking process creation through PSExec and WMI. That said, there's the caveat to that. A lot of device management programs will use PSExec or more commonly WMI for as part of their legitimate activities. So you want to make sure you're not going to interfere with that. So
there's one more interesting one that I had to admit I had to look at. It was to prevent the master boot record modification, something about controlled folder access. So that's probably a deeper, more technical tip, but one I hadn't actually thought of that I found interesting. You can find in Microsoft's write-up.
Yep. But either way, we've got a brand new Russian state-sponsored threat actor. Welcome to the club, Cadet Blizzard. Hope we never have to see you, ever.
I hope you freeze to death in the blizzard, actually.
But, I mean, the reality is, like, main takeaways, if you're not using MFA, it's time. And there are actually Windows hardening things you can do to help protect against some of this activity as well.
And if you're sophisticated and have a SOC, there's a lot of hunting, besides locking down things like the PSI exec or WMI exec, etc. These commands, while administrators use similar ones legitimately, they're pretty good TTP commands, and there's ways to hunt for them. If you're gathering aggregated logs from lots of things, you could have something like a SIM or something to find them. So if you have the resource and a sophisticated group, be sure to occasionally not just defend but hunt and look for some of this, because if you do get the more sophisticated threat actor using your credential, it looks activity. So you definitely want to try to differentiate a known user from when they're doing something normal versus something anomalous.
100%. And this is where having visibility into that is key, and making sure you're actually monitoring it. Well, hey, good tips. Hopefully people don't get nailed by this one. I guess they're primarily operating out of Ukraine and some European nations, Eastern European nations. So if you're in the States, you're, as of right now,
they are
safe.
targeting private organizations that are associated with the Ukrainian government. So if you are a SMB in Ukraine, definitely something to watch for.
Man, what a bunch of jerks.
Yeah. I hope we don't do that. I'm sure we will have cyber campaigns when we go to war with some country, but I hope we purposely avoid collateral damage and actually follow proper war procedures where you're not going after civilians.
Well, the good news is I don't think there is such thing as a private organization in China. They're all traceable back to the government at some point.
The government will tell that organization, we own you all.
I shouldn't joke about that. I hope that never becomes an actual issue.
Yeah.
On next week's episode, World War III.
Unfortunately, we ended on our typical downer. We should probably move it to something more fun.
Oh my God. Kill it.
At least I didn't sing it.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Twitter. I'm at XORRO_. Corey is at SecondEpt, and the both of us are at #the443podcast. Thanks again. You will hear from us next week.
And make sure all comments on my dancing and dad jokes go to Zorro.
Oh my God. Please no.